The Matrix trilogy is known for having some of the coolest fight scenes in movie history. But how did we go from a franchise that had a fight scene like this to a fight scene like this 20 years later? You can see a massive difference between these two fight scenes alone. In the fight between Neo and Morpheus in the first Matrix movie, the shot is wider and you can clearly see what's going on. Whereas in Matrix Resurrections, the shot is cut up multiple times for almost each hit, which is usually done to hide mediocre fight choreography. In this video, I'm going to talk about what exactly happened with the fight scenes in the Matrix Resurrections and why the fight scenes in the original trilogy were so much better, even though they were filmed over 20 years ago. If you're new to this channel, hit that like button to support the video and subscribe and hit the bell notification icon for more content. A quick note about spoilers, I won't be spoiling any major plot points, but I will be showing a few short clips of out of context fight scenes. I also do want to address that I'm one of the apparently few people that seem to actually enjoy the movie.
I like you. Very much.
I was smiling like a 12-year-old girl from beginning to end. And although I didn't love everything about the movie, I was super happy with how it turned out. Having said that, just like many of you noticed, it was really obvious when it came to the movie's fight choreography, it didn't hold up to the original trilogy and was average at best. And it didn't help that the agents in the movie were aiming like stormtroopers.
I've missed you.
Before I talk about what exactly happened in Matrix Resurrections, it's important to know what made the original trilogy's fight scenes so good. You see, back in the day, Western movies for the most part focused a lot more on gunfights and car chase scenes instead of well choreographed fight scenes. It wasn't until the first Matrix did we see a shift in Hollywood's perception. And one of the major reasons why was the Wachowski's love for Hong Kong action movies. This encouraged them to hire Hong Kong martial arts choreographer Yuen Wu-ping, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong. Sorry, I don't speak Hong Kong. I barely speak English. He's the reason why that fight scene with Morpheus and Neo was so good and iconic. And he's also worked on the fight scenes we've seen in Kill Bill and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. To prep for the fight scenes in the original Matrix trilogy, the actors had to train for multiple months, and the martial arts choreographer Yuen Wu-ping developed specific moves to suit each actor's strengths. And even when at one point Hugo Weaving and Keanu Reeves suffered injuries, during pre-production and filming, kung fu dojos were set up in which the cast members could stretch and watch kung fu movies. I wanted to point this out to emphasize the level of immersion these actors in the original Matrix trilogy were experiencing. Even when they weren't training or they were stretching, they're in this environment where they're constantly immersed in the world of kung fu action movies. Whereas 20 years later in the Matrix Resurrections, Yuen Wu-ping wasn't brought back, which is fine since he's in his 70s. He's probably retired and lives in the Hong Kong equivalent of the Playboy Mansion with Xi Jinping, but instead of living with youthful Playboy models, they live with the entire cast of Winnie the Pooh. The problem is, it doesn't seem like anyone replaced the martial arts fight choreographer for the Matrix Resurrections. But before I talk about what happened with the Matrix Resurrections, I want to make it clear that there's a lot more information on the kind of training the actors went through for the original trilogy, since those movies are 20 years old. Whereas there isn't as much information for the Matrix Resurrections since it's still very new. Having said that, I did manage to find some info on the kind of training or lack of that resulted in what we ended up getting in the Matrix Resurrections. The first reason why the fights in the Matrix Resurrections didn't work as well as the original trilogy could be because the actors may not have had as much time to rehearse the fight scenes, or were just given little to no direction on what to do. I'm gonna take a few quotes from an article on EW.com that gave us an idea on what happened during production, so let's start off with this. During an intense sequence, Groff's character, who played Agent Smith in the movie, has to smash Neo's face against a wall. He and Reeves rehearsed the choreography with a flat hand ahead of the shoot date. Now, ahead of the shoot date is pretty vague, and it's not clear whether they meant they rehearsed a few days before, a few weeks before, or a few months before the shoot date. So far, it's open to interpretation, but this is where things stood out for me. Once they arrived on set and were going through the motions, director Lana Wachowski had a thought. Lana's like, if you could do an open palm and put your finger right underneath Keanu's eyeball and then smash his face into the wall, that could be great for camera. The cast, he says, never over-rehearsed, and Lana herself was never quite explicit in what she wanted from her actors. It seems like the actors were basically figuring things out while filming and weren't given a specific direction on what to do when it comes to the fight scenes. This is not a good sign so far. In the article, Keanu talked about how training for the fight scenes in the original trilogy was different from Resurrections. Reeves remembers that on the original trilogy, Lana Wachowski was more behind the monitor, but still hands-on. With Resurrections, she was participating more with the movement of the camera and more interested in doing than rehearsing. It was less about prep and more about everyone's readiness to find the unexpected in the moment. Keanu Reeves confesses they barely rehearsed, if at all. Contrast what I just read with the multiple months of training that the actors had to go through in the original trilogy's fight scenes. When you don't put the work in, it's very clear to the audience that the fight choreography in this movie, compared to the original trilogy, took a massive hit for the worse. This brings me to my second point. Lana Wachowski may not have been as confident directing the fight scenes on her own. According to IndieWire, Lana Wachowski chose to handle all the action scenes herself as opposed to having a second unit. Having a second unit to help out in filming big action scenes is really common, especially for big blockbuster movies. But for whatever reason, Lana decided to do things on her own. I'm gonna make an assumption here and say that the lack of confidence in her abilities might be why she reused a lot of the same iconic moments from the first Matrix movie. We saw the same action moments reused, like Smith punching a chunk out of the column and Smith punching Neo while his back is against the wall, exactly like the first movie. Although she did have Chad Stahelski and David Leitch, who were stunt coordinators in the original Matrix trilogy, help out with this movie, their involvement was limited to a supervising role. And it's not very clear what a supervising role really means in this context. I do want to emphasize that I'm not saying that all the fight scenes were terrible, but I'm saying that the original trilogy set such a high standard to the point where it had a massive influence on Hollywood movies that it's disappointing to see this fourth movie 20 years later be significantly worse, specifically when it comes to the fight choreography. I still would personally place this movie as my second favorite Matrix movie despite all the negativity. I am interested to know what you guys thought of the new movie's fight scenes though. Did you guys love or hate the fight scenes? Did you have a problem with other parts of the movie? Or did you just enjoy the movie? Let me know in the comment sections below. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon if you haven't already to support the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.